Welcome to another of our MELCA videos in which we're speaking about the various ways separating families can be supported. I'm Marguerite, I'm a director at MELCA. My co-director is Tricia Peters, financial planner, and our co-founder is Dr. Tina Sinclair, psychologist. Today I'm going to be speaking to Mary Louise Hatch, and we're going to be speaking about parenting coordination and how that can help parents after their separation. So welcome, Mary Louise.
Thank you,
for coming in. And Mary Louise is a collaborative lawyer. She's a mediator, a family dispute resolution practitioner and a parenting coordinator. And she runs Spectrum Law and Spectrum Mediations. So I thought it would be a really interesting conversation to learn more for all of us about parenting coordination. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to tell us what that is.
Parenting coordination, Marguerite, is really new in Australia. It's been in other countries for quite a few years now, especially in the United States, Canada, in South Africa. But it's only now that in Australia we've started to embrace it. And it's a wonderful concept because it really extends the repertoire available to people who need help around, their parenting arrangements.
So this is for people who already have arrangements in place?
Yeah.
Court orders?
That's the idea of it, that it's really to help people usually who have court orders, whether they're final, definitely if they're final orders, but even if they've got interim orders, it can be a really useful way of helping them work out how to interpret those orders and how to implement those orders. It might even be people who have a parenting plan perhaps and don't have orders yet, but are still struggling with how do we make these actually work. And often in families, and you and I see it all the time, where that people are really struggling just on a day-to-day basis, especially with COVID-19. What are we going to do? How's this going to roll? What do we do if we can't, sort of work this out? If we're arguing about stuff, we know that conflict for families is, really the worst thing for children. Research is really clear. Conflict is the most important thing to be keeping to an absolute minimum or eradicating. So parenting coordination really is all about that, about helping parents to implement those orders, but it's more than that. It's
Could
helping,
I just take you back a minute, Mary Louise?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
it sounds like what you're talking about is helping people to interpret what's on the written page of court orders or a parenting plan. And that strikes me as really interesting because I think when orders and parenting plans are made, that can often be done under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of compromise, and what it is to live the words can be quite different from what it is in that pressure cooker environment when orders and plans are being made. And it's the case, I think, very often that people actually aren't on the same page, are they, at all? They're not necessarily even wanting to agree to what's being written. And the fine detail trips them up.
The idea that, an agreement is, something that people embrace and go off into the sunset holding hands saying, yay, we've worked it out, is just... It's just non-existent, in reality.
And certainly not when a judge has had to make orders.
Exactly. And you and I have both had clients that have come to us and said, I've got these orders that have been made. Maybe they weren't made by a judge, but they were made, in a little room outside the courtroom where we were trying to madly negotiate over a day to come up with something. I can't even remember what it was I agreed to. And now I've got this, and it's, I don't really like it, but I guess I have to try and make it work, and I don't know how to make it work, and I don't know what to do. So that's really where parenting coordination can help. And it's not just about the orders themselves or the agreement that's reached themselves. It's more than that. It's really about helping parents, perhaps for the first time, develop some really good, healthy co-parenting skills. So there's a lot of education involved, a lot of coaching involved in working with the parents. And it's working with both the parents together.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about that. If one person comes to you looking for help, it's probably because some conflict or difficulty has already been experienced, but then you're going to invite the other spouse into the parenting coordination to start working with them as a couple.
Yeah, yeah.
And can courts order people to do that?
Yes, courts can. And in Australia, again, it's still a relatively new concept, but it's starting to take off. And there have been orders made now out of the family courts that people attend upon, a parenting coordinator, and it's usually for around the period of about 2 years.
Okay.
So it's an elongated process. Yeah.
So it's quite a few sessions that you might have.
Yes, yeah. And that's something which makes it, again, quite different from mediation, in that you're really developing a much a different long-term type relationship with these with this couple.
So it's more like a planned program of education and support rather than crisis intervention?
Yes.
Is that how you'd say it?
Yes, yeah, very much so. There might be some crisis intervention, and there often is at the beginning, but then it's okay, now we've got that there. Now, let's really look and see what's happening for you guys.
Yes.
Why haven't things been working so far? What's going on? And taking people often back to some fundamental concepts around what happens when people separate, what happens, in terms of the grief process, what's going on for them there, understanding about relationship cycles. What does it mean when you aren't in an intimate relationship anymore, and often overnight you've gone to from a relationship which was perhaps not so positive, but still, a state of sort of positive intimacy, as they call it, to a state of negative intimacy, and it's that flip for some people. It's really, really difficult.
There's probably communication problems. There's some dysfunction in the relationship at minimum, and then you're asking people to cooperate.
That's right.
In a situation about their children, usually the things everyone treasures the most.
Yes.
And in your experience, do you think that it's often the case that parents have actually legitimately different perspectives and interpretations and understanding? I understand that sometimes there can be a bit of opportunism that happens about the interpretation, but generally speaking, I guess my observation has been sometimes there are people who just decide to breach orders because it doesn't suit them.
Yeah.
But very often when we're talking about smaller incidences, it is just a difference in interpretation.
Yeah, often it is, and sort of often when you think about the lead up to agreements that have been made, there have been different stories and narratives that have come along with people up until that point. So then they end up with an agreement which is based often on their own view of things.
Yeah.
So when they have the written word, it looks quite different from one person to the next, and that sounds crazy, because as lawyers we think that that's it, that's definitive, but it's not.
And it is different sitting in your lawyer's office and having something explained, and as you say, often these things are a product of some quite intense negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think we both know it's true to say that, by 5 o'clock in the afternoon of a long mediation or discussion in the precincts of the court, people's attention is frayed and everyone wants to get out of there, and what seemed like a small compromise or a minor detail at that time can really become quite manifest later on.
Yeah, exactly right. So, helping people often just with those fundamental understandings, and the beauty of it is because you're working with them both together, you're developing these common understandings around, like I said, whether it's grief and loss, whether it's relationship cycles, so many different concepts that people, need to, that we all need to really understand in our day-to-day lives that a lot of us don't, or we've forgotten, and sort of getting, it's a bit of a reboot, if you like, and getting people back, okay, let's just get some fundamental stuff happening here.
To be positive and to be constructive and trying to work together.
Yes.
And I'm interested in you using the word together.
Yeah.
Because when you think about people who go through the litigation system, there's nothing about that has you together. It's absolutely about tearing you apart and people coming at the problem from polar opposite positions.
Yeah.
And particularly when you're talking about children, you can see how that ends up in more conflict, not less. And so in some ways you're giving people a new opportunity to rebuild something, as you say, a reset.
Yeah, and sometimes I say that to people. Okay, let's look at this as the first day of something new and something quite different.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that idea.
Yeah, and it's you know, sure, there's stuff that's happened and stuff that people aren't proud of that they've done, and everything else. We're human, and it happens. But how do we now try and start from the same baseline and move forward, and helping people with fundamental understandings around what is healthy, respectful communication. Yeah. What does that look like? Yeah. You know, because it hasn't been happening for a long time. Yeah. And often it hasn't been happening between the lawyers. Yeah. Not all lawyers, but often, it really is that adversarial, I'm right, you're wrong, black and white.
It can be really unhelpful.
Really unhelpful. Yeah. And these people who are already struggling are being encouraged to be fighting with each other and increasing conflict. So it's really that starting with that baseline, going, okay, let's forget a lot of the stuff.
Yes. Yeah, because it's not helpful for the future. But I imagine, as somebody who's struggled through the litigation system and ended up with court orders, whether it's ones they've written by consent with some level of compromise, or whether they've been judge-made orders, that must be so refreshing to meet with a professional who says, I'm here to help you both and your children. Yeah. Because that's not the message or the language that comes out of adversarial litigation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm there to help, as you say, them work together as co-parents, together parenting their children in a united way, whatever that might look like. It's an interesting thing to be able to, or a real privilege, I think, to be able to work with parents to help them understand where they're at and what's happening for them, but not. It's not therapy.
No.
And it's not mediation. It's different to all those things. So in a way, it's sort of, I'm saying to them, I'm still part of a system that you've been in, but this is really a healthy way of working, going forward together as parents, and understanding what the different options they have available to them to be able to parent, the different types of parenting relationship that they can have, for instance.
And so the work that you do with couples as a parenting coordinator is not confidential, and I'm using that term in the way that lawyers use it, which says that if these discussions, if somebody wants to refer to these discussions later on in enforcement proceedings or in a court, that could happen.
Yeah, so yes, you're right, it's not a confidential process, and that's a really important hallmark of parenting coordination, that it isn't confidential, and that really differentiates it, if you like, from something, say, like mediation, where you again are working with two parents, but mediation is confidential, and this isn't, and it means that people are accountable. Yes. Really, we're all accountable for what's happening here. And as a parenting coordinator, I can have a lot more of a directive role with parents. Okay.
And I think that's important when we're talking about people who've experienced a lot of conflict between them. Yeah. So you could make some recommendations, for example?
Yes, I can make recommendations back to the court. Yeah. I can't change orders or anything like that. I mean,
and that's not what this is about, is it? It's about supporting people to live with the orders that have been made. It's not about remediating what those orders say.
Exactly right. And often you're dealing with families who have been through a lot. Yeah. And have been through a lot of, it might be a lot of iterations of orders and agreements and all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, it's still really tough.
Yes.
So they don't often really need to have it redone again and again. It's like, let's work with what we've got. Yes. Because there's always a lot of ways that we can make these things work if we use our imaginations and actually have some, common respect for each other as the parents of our children.
Yeah. But it sounds like the communication is really key there. And I'm thinking about the great difficulty that lots of people experience if they want to enforce court orders. So there might be minor little infractions and breaches that are irritating but don't actually affect the well-being of the children, although some of them might have an impact on children because they're seeing conflict between their parents. And it's very expensive and difficult for parents to go back to a court and ask for final orders to be changed to accommodate those things. So you're really providing a service outside the court, but in the framework of the family law legal system that adds enormous value to people that hasn't been there before. And it's quite remarkable when you think about it, that here we are in 2020 and this has only just come here.
It's incredible. It's incredible that it's only just come here now. But it's such a refreshing innovation that we've finally adopted it.
It's a supportive approach. Even though you can make recommendations and you can be quite directive, you're doing it to support people to carry out what they've actually agreed to do or been ordered to do.
And it's a very holistic approach too. So as a parenting coordinator, I can, for instance, reach out to third parties. So I could reach out to the teacher at the school and speak with the teacher at the school. So the other professionals who have been working with this family to get a better idea. I might work with a child inclusive practitioner, for instance.
So that's a practitioner who would meet with the child?
Yes.
Such as a child psychologist?
Yes. To get a greater sense of what's happening for their child or their children.
That's really interesting.
It's powerful.
It is. To be looking in a holistic way, as you say, about everybody who's in this child's world or the world of the parents.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering, could you give us an example of the kind of issues that people might have brought to you?
Yeah, so they can be anything from, as you said, the smallest issues, just the niggles, the little changes, the changeovers just don't work properly. We don't. I had one recently where the changeovers were always a really difficult time.
As they can be.
And the changeovers, were the orders were not really that clear on how changeover was really meant to happen. It was just going to be, on a Friday at 4:00, and that the father would pick up the child, but they were just so awkward, and that it was so distressing, and unfortunately, one of the parents sort of was using it as an opportunity really to engage with the other parent quite negatively in front of the child. So it was really about how do we work with the orders that are there just to make that small change so that didn't happen at changeover.
To either remove the opportunity.
Well, it was we set ground rules around what it would look like.
What conversations people could have
or not have, and how they would talk with each other, and we talked about interesting things, just like understanding each other's perspectives on things. Sort of that my view of things isn't the same as yours. Understanding things like you've probably seen the concept of the anger iceberg. Someone's coming at you being very angry, and often there's all this other stuff happening underneath for them. So, understanding each other's worlds was very much a part of that, and seeing how it is for them and how they've been coping with these changes and why people are, doing what they're doing. And then from there, we were able to set some clear ground rules. Now, we have a plan A and a plan B. And it might be, if that doesn't work, then we'll work with something else. So people have that sense of hope as well. It's not sort of like, we have to do this, we've got these orders and we have to do it and it's not working, and now what do we do?
And I'm also interested in that example you gave about sometimes the need of one parent to download on the other one, and handover provides sometimes the only opportunity, a terrible opportunity because of the children being there, but sometimes it just provides that moment. And so if you identify that there's something going on for a parent there, that maybe they need some of their own counselling or therapeutic support, that really the work about the end of the relationship has never been done.
Yep.
And that somebody really needs that conversation, which is very understandable. You could have a role in helping them to manage that need.
Yeah, and I would have that conversation with that parent. Now, when I'm working as a parenting coordinator, I'm working with both the parents together. I see them both together. But there can be other conversations sometimes that need to be had outside of that room of the joint conversation.
Sure.
And it might be with one parent talking about the supports that they've got, and the extra help that they might need, and perhaps them seeing whether going back to the psychologist that they haven't seen for a long time, or speaking with their GP about how things are going and what sort of referrals they might need. So very much people need that additional support sometimes.
So there's a clearly defined process, but there's flexibility within it. The experience of the practitioner, the parenting coordinator, is going to be really important here. So clearly you've got to have a strong mediation background, and presumably to be a family dispute resolution practitioner is an asset. And to
especially because you're dealing with high conflict families, really. It really helps to have that additional knowledge and training as a family dispute resolution practitioner.
Well, it's really great to hear that this is on offer for parents. So if you're a parent and you identify that this is something that might be helpful for you, whether or not you've got court orders, maybe you have a parenting plan and you're having some struggles, what do people do? Do they need to go via their lawyer, or can they contact a parenting coordinator directly? Yes,
they could. So they could contact a parenting coordinator directly. Parenting Coordination Australia has for instance, has a website and they can look for parenting coordinators there. They could talk to their lawyer and say, what do you think about this as an option? And their lawyer then might contact myself or another parenting coordinator, or they might seek an order from the court. That the court actually orders that happen, and it will depend obviously on the circumstances and whether or not they think the other party would be okay with engaging in that parenting coordination process. So
it's a question to be asked.
Well,
I'm really delighted that we have you as part of our collaborative community.
Thank you.
And if Mary Louise's details didn't come across, you can always contact MELCA for this help and we can make the referral. And I'm excited to hear about this change and wish you well in your practice, which I'm sure is going to be a huge benefit to many families.
Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you for having me. And I'm really, really honoured to be able to talk about this process, because I think it just adds another option for parents. Anything that will keep people away from adversarial processes and help them develop really healthy relationships moving forward to support their children is a really, really positive thing.
Absolutely agree with that.
Thanks, Marguerite.
Thank you.